On a cold night in England, as the hearth dimmed and wax began to drip from half-melted candles onto damp stone floors, you opened your eyes and found yourself awake in a world that reeked of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the distant echo of church bells marking the first hour of a rain that would bleed history dry. The year was 1509, and the boy who had just been crowned was Henry VIII, 17 years old, more than 6 feet tall, with copper-red hair, razor-sharp eyes, and shoulders broad enough to carry a kingdom. But perhaps not even Henry himself knew that he would not only carry England, he would tear it apart, rebuild it in his image, and leave his name seared like a scar into the soul of Christianity. Henry was not born a tyrant. In the beginning, he was the golden hope of a bruised kingdom, handsome, athletic, musically gifted, multilingual, and above all, dazzling. He could ride, fight, dance, compose, and charm an entire court into breathless silence just by entering a room. But behind the silk robes and easy laughter, behind the hunting horns and candlelit feasts, a storm was brewing in the heart of a boy king who would never grow into the kind of man the world needed him to be. From the moment he took the throne, Henry spent money as though the end of time was nigh. His father, Henry VII, had been miserly to the point of obsession, building up the royal treasury with an iron grip. Henry VIII burned through it all, funding banquets, tournaments, castles, and tapestries by the thousands, transforming his palaces into stages for a performance in which he was both star and god. He married Catherine of Aragon, his older brother's widow, to maintain the alliance with Spain. Catherine was 6 years his senior, devout, intelligent, and once considered the perfect queen. But when her pregnancies ended in funerals instead of heirs, and the only surviving child was a girl named Mary, Henry began to see her not as a wife, but as a curse. Love turned to fear, and fear turned to action. In a world where the king was the state, a king without a son was a national threat. And Henry, haunted by the bloody ghosts of the Wars of the Roses, that began to believe or convince himself that his marriage was cursed by God for marrying his brother's wife. But beneath all the scripture and guilt lay the real spark, Anne Boleyn. She entered Henry's world like a lit match dropped into a powder keg. Not beautiful in the conventional sense, but clever, sharp, French-educated, and above all withholding, unlike her sister. Anne would not sleep with the king unless he married her. And that was enough to drive Henry into obsession. He did not just want her, he wanted to crown her. And to do that, he would break with the Pope, with Rome, with the very church that had baptized him. When the Pope refused to grant him an annulment, Henry overturned the entire board. With the help of Thomas Cromwell, a street-smart commoner with a mind like a trap, Henry pushed through the Act of Supremacy in the year 1534 and declared himself head of the Church of England. In one motion, he became king, priest, and prophet. This was not reformation out of faith, it was reformation out of lust, out of desperation, out of the hunger for a son who did not yet exist. But the true tragedy was still to come. In the year 1533, Anne gave birth not to the son Henry craved, but to a daughter Elizabeth. The pregnancies that followed ended in heartbreak. And soon, the woman for whom he had burned the world became another mistake to be erased. Less than 3 years after their wedding, Anne was beheaded on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, charges most believe were fabricated. Her brother died with her. Henry barely blinked. Days later, and married Jane Seymour, quiet, dutiful, obedient, and in the year 1537, she gave him the prize he had killed for a son, Edward. But Jane died 12 days after childbirth. And in that, Henry saw the perfect wife, one who gave him a boy and then slipped quietly from the stage. With every heartbreak, a new law was written. With every wife discarded, a chapel was broken. The king's bed became an altar of blood and prophecy. One wife was divorced. One was beheaded. One died. Then came 3 more. One rejected. One executed. And one who nursed him as a dying tyrant. More nurse than bride. From the golden prince who danced at court, he became a bloated, festering monarch with a leg that rotted in real time. His body so decayed that mechanical hoists were needed just to lift him to the next floor. And while his flesh was failing, England was changing too, no longer the Pope's dominion, but the kingdom of a man ruled by ghosts and driven by ego. When Henry died in the year 1547, he left behind a sickly son, 2 daughters stripped of legitimacy, a fractured realm soaked in religious paranoia, and a legacy built not on peace, but on blood, doctrine, and loneliness. Some call him monster. Others call him martyr to dynasty. But maybe, just maybe, all Henry ever truly wanted was to be loved and not forgotten. Close your eyes and imagine this: a boy not quite 18, wrapped in velvet, pacing across the polished stones of a palace corridor that smells faintly of lavender and candle wax. The year is 1509. Outside, the London streets are choked with the reek of open sewers and horse dung. But in here, in the world of kings, the rushes on the floor are fresh. The tapestries catch the firelight like the painted folds of heaven. And the air is thick with expectation. Henry, the new king, strides through his own world, as though born to command it. The court is dazzled. The people are in awe, and all across the kingdom, hearts beat a little faster at the thought that England is finally in the hands of someone young, someone golden, someone touched by God. He was tall, they said, unusually tall for the time, with hair like autumn fire and eyes that shifted between blue and green, depending on the light. He could ride a horse at full gallop and strike a target with a lance while the crowd roared. He played the lute, sang with a rich tenor, and danced until the candles burned low. He quoted Latin, debated theology, and wrote letters full of wit and charm. But for all his talents, what truly set Henry apart in those early years was the way he made people feel. He was a prince who made you believe in magic, and for a while, at least, that magic seemed real. The court of Henry VIII in those first years was a place of color and music, of open windows and silk banners fluttering in the breeze. There were feasts that lasted for hours, with meat stacked high on silver platters and sugared almonds scattered like gemstones across embroidered cloth, swans stuffed with spices, pies shaped like castles, wines imported from Gascony, and musicians playing lutes while dogs dozed beneath the tables. In the great halls of England, under ceilings carved like the ribs of ships, a new age was beginning. And at the center of it all stood a king who had everything except a son, Catherine of Aragon. His wife was no ordinary queen. She had been a princess of Spain, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, raised to rule, educated in Latin and philosophy. As proud as she was pious, she had first married Henry's older brother, Arthur, and after his early death, spent years in limbo, a royal widow without a country, a bride without a groom. Eventually, with papal approval and much political calculation, she became Henry's queen. She was 6 years older than he was. But their early marriage was marked by genuine warmth and shared laughter. She managed the court with quiet strength, gave alms to the poor, and knelt in prayer with a dignity that even her enemies could not fault. But God did not give her sons who lived. There were pregnancies, many of them, whispers in the corridors of lost children, of stillbirths, of tiny bodies buried before their names could be recorded. And though in the year 1516 she bore a daughter, Mary, who survived, it was not enough. Kings needed sons. Queens who could not give them became shadows. Catherine prayed. Henry waited. And the silence between them began to grow. In those same years, England changed around them. Henry, ever restless, turned his eyes to Europe. In the year 1511, he joined the Holy League against France, eager to prove himself, not just a Renaissance prince but a warrior king. 2 years later, he crossed the Channel with an army and captured 2 small towns, strutting through the mud like a second Henry V. But while he played soldier in France, trouble brewed closer to home. The Scots invaded, thinking the English distracted. Catherine, acting as regent, organized the defense. The Battle of Flodden in the year 1513 was a slaughter. 10,000 Scots died, including their king, James IV. Catherine sent Henry the bloodied coat of the dead king as a trophy. He was pleased, but even then, he must have noticed while he chased glory abroad. His wife held the kingdom together, inside the palaces. The days passed in the rhythm of court life, morning mass, petitions, letters, hunts, feasts, music, and whispers. Always the whispers. Henry's early advisors included Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, a brilliant man who had risen from nothing to become Lord Chancellor. Wolsey managed the machinery of government with tireless energy, freeing Henry to focus on the parts of kingship he enjoyed: sport, diplomacy, esplendor, and seduction. For all his intelligence, Henry never enjoyed ruling in the dry sense. He preferred the theater of monarchy, the gestures, the displays, the performances. It was not enough to be king. He had to be seen as king. But beneath the velvet and the gold, cracks were beginning to show. By the mid-1520s, Catherine was in her 40s. The likelihood of further children was fading, and with every passing year, Henry's anxiety grew. He began to tell himself, or perhaps to believe, that his marriage had been cursed, that by taking his brother's widow, he had broken divine law. He quoted Leviticus. He wrote to Rome. He demanded answers. But Rome was under the thumb of Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, who had recently sacked the city. The Pope, cornered and cautious, stalled. And then Anna appeared. She was not meant to be a queen. She was the daughter of a minor nobleman, educated in the courts of the Netherlands and France. Clever, sharp-tongued, and utterly unlike the docile ladies of the English court, Henry had once pursued her sister. But Anne said no. She said no to his gifts, to his poems, to his promises. She said no to his bed. And in saying no, she ensnared him utterly. Let us pause here. In this moment, before the storm breaks, picture the gardens of Greenwich in summer. The hedgerows trimmed, the air thick with the scent of roses and damp earth. Henry walks with Anne, her dark eyes laughing, her French manners exotic and strange. Somewhere nearby, Catherine kneels in prayer. Alone. The bells toll softly from the chapel. The court watches in silence, and England, though it does not know it yet, is about to be reborn, not by fire and sword, not by reason or necessity, but by the heat of a king's obsession and the cunning of a woman who would not yield. The sun begins to set. The shadows stretch long across the flagstones, and in the hush before night, the wind carries a whisper, the first faint rustle of a crown about to slip, a church about to crack, and a king about to trade heaven itself for one more chance at a son. Sleep now, the rest is coming. Let us drift gently now into the year 1533, to a palace heavy with silence and thick velvet curtains drawn against the judgment of the world. Anne Boleyn is pregnant. The court knows. The kingdom suspects. And Henry, King of England, no longer asks the Pope for permission. He simply takes what he wants. The marriage has not been blessed by Rome, but it has been made real in secret. The bride's belly has begun to swell. And that more than any papal decree is what truly matters now. For Henry, this is not just a wedding. It is a war. A war against the old order. A war against delay. A war against God. If it comes to that, the Archbishop of Canterbury has been replaced. Thomas Cranmer, hand-picked and sympathetic, declares Henry's marriage to Catherine invalid and the union with Anne valid. In the spring, the court watches as Anne is crowned Queen of England in a ceremony soaked in gold and defiance. She wears robes of deep purple, a color reserved for royalty, and her dark hair flows loose beneath the crown. A sign of virginity, though no one dares say otherwise. Londoners line the streets in silence. They had loved Catherine. They had feared Rome. And now they watched, uncertain, as their world changed beneath their feet. And then, in September, Anne gives birth, not to a son, but to a daughter. They name her Elizabeth. Henry tries to hide his disappointment. He had torn the church in half, risked rebellion, excommunicated himself, and defied centuries of tradition, and still no boy. But Elizabeth is healthy, beautiful, alert, and Henry tells himself, there will be more children. There must be. This is only the beginning. But even as he forces a smile for the ambassadors, even as he calls her my pearl, a shadow falls across the cradle, a shadow shaped like fear. Meanwhile, the world outside the court is reeling. The Act of Supremacy in the year 1534 officially names Henry as the supreme head of the Church of England. For centuries, the Pope had spoken with the voice of God in England. Now, it is Henry's voice that echoes from the pulpit. Priests fumble their sermons. Altars are stripped. Monasteries look nervously toward London. The people, most of whom cannot read, kneel and pray as they always have. But the words are changing. The faces are changing. And the saints are vanishing from the windows. Something ancient is breaking. But inside the palaces, the game goes on. Music still plays. Feasts still unfold. And now Queen has power, real power for the first time. But power comes with a price. She is no longer the mysterious beauty behind the throne. She is the throne. And queens must produce sons. Quickly, she becomes pregnant again. And again. But each time the hope dies in her hands. In the winter of 1536, she miscarries a boy. Henry is devastated. Or angry. Or both. He begins to speak with Thomas Cromwell, the man who once helped him bring Anne to the crown. Now Cromwell listens quietly as the king wonders aloud whether God is punishing him again. Anne's enemies grow bold. Her sharp tongue and fierce opinions had once enchanted the king. Now they grate. She has alienated courtiers, argued with nobles, taken sides in matters best, left untouched. And Henry is watching someone else now. Jane Seymour. Pale, silent, obedient. Everything Anne is not. And so the great wheel turns again. In April of that same year, men begin to disappear into the Tower. Gentlemen of the court, musicians, even Anne's own brother. The charges are whispered: adultery, incest, treason. Anne is arrested and taken by barge to the Tower of London, the same tower where, just 3 years earlier, she had slept on the eve of her coronation, watching the lights of the city below and dreaming of glory. Now the walls close in with a colder purpose. No more dreams, only echoes. The trial is swift. The verdict is written before a word is spoken. She is guilty of everything. On the 19th of May, she walks to the scaffold in a gray dress and a red petticoat. Her hair is tucked beneath a plain cap. She speaks calmly. She praises the king. She forgives. She kneels. The French swordsman brought in specially does his work quickly. Her body is carried away in a plain wooden chest. The queen is gone. Her name erased. And 11 days later, Henry marries Jane. No mourning, no pause, no apologies. But do not rush past this moment. Do not skip the silence that follows. For though Henry pretends to move on, something inside him has changed. He has killed the woman he once burned heaven to possess. And though he will say it was justice, though he will dine and laugh and hunt and sing, there is a sliver of cold iron now embedded in his soul. The golden prince is fading. A new Henry is being born, one who no longer needs permission, one who does not forgive. Outside the palace, the changes continue. The monasteries fall. Cromwell's men ride out with ledgers and soldiers, knocking on ancient wooden doors, unhooking gold from altars, unseating monks who have lived their entire lives behind cloistered walls. The libraries are emptied. The relics are burned. The land is seized and sold. What had stood for 1,000 years is stripped in a decade. Stone by stone, word by word, the bones of saints are scattered, and the gold flows to the crown. Jane Seymour gives Henry the gift he most desires in the autumn of 1537. A son, Edward. The bells ring. The bonfires blaze. Wine spills across the cobblestones of London. The kingdom sings. Henry's joy is so great. It cracks through his face like light breaking through thunderclouds. And then, 12 days later, Jane dies. She is the only one he will bury beside him. The only wife who gave him what he wanted and asked for nothing else. The palace grows quiet again. Henry wears black. He disappears from court for weeks. But beneath the mourning is the steady pulse of a man who still believes that everything God, country, wife, church must bend to his will. And somewhere in a cradle, Edward stirs. The boy who would be king, the boy Henry would die believing could save everything he had broken. It is winter now. The wind at Greenwich Palace howls through stone corridors and rattles the latticed windows like the fingers of spirits too long forgotten. Henry, King of England, has grown thicker. His face is swollen from years of indulgence. The red of his cheeks no longer youthful but wine-puffed and veined with rage. His leg, ever since a terrible jousting accident in the year 1536, festers. It smells of rot and old blood. His servants wince each time the bandages are changed, though they dare not look away. And the boy, Edward, is growing. Small and pale, and watched by a dozen nurses. The heir has come. But the king's body is beginning to slip. Slowly. Painfully. Beneath the weight of his own legend. Yet still, there must be a queen. The year is 1539. Europe is watching. The Catholic powers of Spain and the Holy Roman Empire are growing closer, and England torn from the Pope, and the Church of Rome needs friends. Henry needs a Protestant ally. And so, Thomas Cromwell, still the king's most trusted hand, arranges a new match. Not for love, not for beauty, but for politics. Anne of Cleves, a German noblewoman, is chosen. She is painted quite flatteringly by Hans Holbein, and the portrait is sent to Henry, who stares at it by candlelight and convinces himself that she is pleasant enough, but the real Anne is not a portrait. When she arrives in England, in the early days of the year 1540, Henry rides out in disguise to surprise her. He fancies himself a romantic still, a gallant king cloaked in mystery. He bursts into her chambers, expecting instant recognition, perhaps even swooning. Instead, Anne, practical, shy, unused to courtly drama, barely reacts. She does not recognize him. She does not bow with enough grace. And something inside Henry curdled. He calls her a Flanders mare. But the wedding must go forward. The alliance demands it. And so, on the 6th of January, they are married. But the king is cold, distant. The marriage is never consummated. Within months, Henry is seeking a way out, and Cromwell, the man who arranged the match, begins to sense the walls shifting around him. Anne, to her credit, is shrewd. She agrees to an annulment. She says the marriage was never completed, and she does not fight. In return, she is given lands, titles, a generous income, and even the title of the king's beloved sister. She will live quietly, comfortably, and, unlike many others, she will survive. But Cromwell is not so lucky. The failure of the Cleves marriage is a political embarrassment. And Henry, now moody, swollen, and increasingly paranoid, needs someone to blame. Cromwell is arrested, accused of treason, of heresy, of ambition too great for a common-born man. On the 28th of July, in the year 1540, Cromwell is executed. His head, once bowed in loyal counsel, now rolls beneath the axe. And on that very same day, Henry marries again. Wife number 5, Catherine Howard. She is young, perhaps no older than 16 or 17, pretty, flirtatious, full of life and laughter, a niece of the Duke of Norfolk, and a cousin of Anne Boleyn. Henry is enchanted. Her youth is intoxicating. He calls her his rose without a thorn. He dresses her in yevils, bathes her in affection. The court murmurs with unease. But no one dares speak too loudly. Catherine dances through the palace like sunlight in winter. And Henry, now in his late 40s, heavy, aching, proud, pretends, for a little while, that he is young again. But ghosts follow her. Before her days at court, Catherine had lived under lax supervision in the household of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. There had been other men, flirtations, kisses, perhaps more. And after her marriage to the king, those past secrets begin to stir. Worse, she may have taken another lover still. Even as queen. Rumors spread. Letters are found. Witnesses talk. And Henry, who once tore the church in half to marry a woman who enchanted him, now learns that the girl he called pure has betrayed him. He breaks. His grief is volcanic. He refuses to believe it. Then he demands to see the evidence. Then he collapses into rage. He shouts for a sword to kill her himself, then retreats to his bedchambers and weeps. Curtains drawn tight. Fire stoked high. The air thick with the stench of ointments for his ulcerated leg and betrayal in his lungs. Catherine is arrested. She begs for mercy. She never expected to be queen. She says she did not know what was required. But it is too late. On the 13th of February, in the year 1542, Catherine Howard is led to the scaffold at the Tower of London. She is so small they must help her up. The night before, she had asked for the block to be brought to her room so she could practice laying her head on it. Imagine that. A girl, barely more than a child, rehearsing her own death. The axe falls. The rose is gone. And the king orders that her name be struck from every record, every wall, every chamber. He will never speak it again. The court grows colder. The firelight flickers more dimly. The laughter dies in the great halls. Henry is alone once more. More monstrous than ever. More hollowed by the ghosts he himself created. 5 wives gone. 1 left to come. But that is a story for another night. Now rest. Let the fire burn low. Let the shadows stretch soft and long across the floor. And listen to the silence of a kingdom ruled by a man who once believed he was chosen by God, and now lives haunted by the women he could not keep, and the peace he could not buy. Sleep comes gently. The worst, perhaps, is still ahead. Now the king is old, not by the measure of years, for he is only 52, but by the measure of pain, weight, regret, and the ghosts that follow him from chamber to chamber, like hounds that have tasted blood and never forget the scent. It is the year 1543. The court is quieter than before. The tapestries still hang. The silver still gleams. The music still plays, but the laughter is dimmer. Cautious. Measured. The firelight flickers more than it glows. And somewhere beneath the roar of politics and prayer, there is the slow, constant sound of a leg wound leaking pus into stained bandages. Henry is no longer the Golden Prince. That man has been buried beneath layers of flesh, if fear and fury. His leg, wounded in that long-ago joust, refuses to heal. The pain is constant. Sometimes it rages like fire. Sometimes it pulses like a second heartbeat. Servants carry him with hoists. Courtiers walk lightly on the floorboards. Everyone watches his eyes, listens for the rise in his voice, waits for the days when the pain turns to thunder and someone, anyone must pay. And still, there must be a queen. She comes quietly, not as a beauty, not as a political prize, not as a breathless girl chosen for her fertility. Her name is Catherine Parr, and she is a widow twice over. In her early 30s, thoughtful, well-educated, devout, steady in speech and careful in gaze, she does not flatter the king, nor resist him. When he proposes and when Henry proposes, there is no room for refusal. She bows her head and says yes. It is a marriage made not for love, not even for duty, but for survival. For both of them, Catherine enters the royal household not as a queen who dreams of diamonds, but as a nurse who understands illness, as a mother figure to 3 motherless children, And as a woman who knows how to live in the orbit of power without being burned alive by it, and it is because of her quiet, calm, relentlessly patient, that the last years of Henry's reign are not entirely swallowed by chaos. She creates a home, if it can be called that, within the palace. She brings Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, and Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, back into court life, back into Henry's grudging favor. She steadies Edward's tutors. She oversees household matters with the efficiency of a woman who has buried 2 husbands and understands the weight of male ruin. And above all, she survives. But it is not easy. Catherine is drawn to Protestant theology. She reads, she debates, she writes, and this in a palace riddled with informers and factions is dangerous. Henry, though he broke with Rome, remains Catholic in his heart, or at least in his habits. He kneels before gilded altars, even as he orders their treasures melted down. He burns reformers on Monday, and Catholics on Tuesday. His mood changes with the tides. And in one terrible moment, the conservatives at court persuade him that Catherine is too radical. He signs a warrant for her arrest. She finds out, and in one of the most breathless scenes in the long theater of Henry's life, she throws herself at his feet, not weeping, not pleading, but reasoning. She tells him that her words on Scripture were only meant to distract him from his pain, to honor his superior wisdom, that she has no ambition, no agenda, only reverence for her husband, her king. He has Zoffa ein mind. And Henry, to everyone's astonishment, believes her, or chooses to. He turns on the men who had urged her downfall. And Catherine Parr returns to her rooms, shaken, but unbroken. Elsewhere in the kingdom, the land still turns beneath the seasons. Fields are plowed, bells ring, bread is baked. But nothing is as it was. The monasteries are gone, their stones carted away, their gardens grown wild. The poor no longer have alms. The sick no longer have beds. The saints have been scraped from the church walls. And the liturgy is in English now, alien to the ears of older men who still mouth Latin in their sleep. The crown is heavier than ever. The king's treasury, once filled with gold, stripped from churches, is nearly empty again. War with France has drained it. Vanity has drained it. Palaces and feasts and cannons have drained it. Henry continues to wage war, as if he were still 20 years old. Crossing the Channel, one final time in the year 1544, to take the city of Boulogne, a victory that means little and costs much. His body, bloated and stinking, is hoisted onto ships and back again. Like a relic that once inspired fear, but now inspires only exhaustion. The court walks on eggshells. No one knows what to say. His moods are volcanic. His meals are enormous. His breath is short. The ulcer in his leg worsens. His teeth ache. His fingers swell with gout. His mind sharpens and dulls unpredictably. Sometimes he is the king of old commanding, eloquent, thunderous in vision. Sometimes he is a child in a man's body, crying with pain, lashing out at shadows, begging for warmth no one can give. And still Catherine remains. Still she reads beside him. Still she orders the rooms kept warm. Still she ensures that Elizabeth has lessons, that Mary has dignity, that Edward has prayers. She outlives his wrath. She outlasts his silence. And in the winter of the year 1546, the palace grows quiet for good. Henry stops attending court. He does not leave his rooms. He does not speak of the future. A law passed 4 years earlier had made it treason to predict the king's death. And so no one dares to say aloud what everyone already knows. The end is near. The priests are waiting. The nobles are circling. The leg cannot be healed. The breath comes in gasps. The days shorten. The fire burns low. And in the early hours of the 28th of January, in the year 1547, Henry VIII dies. Catherine Parr is by his side. So is Archbishop Cranmer, who holds his hand in silence as the king slips away too weak to speak, but still able to squeeze once in answer when asked if he dies with Christ. And then the breath stops. And the silence that follows is not grief, not yet, but relief. Henry is gone. The king is dead. The monster sleeps. The king is dead. The world exhales. It is the 28th of January. In the year 1547, somewhere inside Whitehall Palace, the windows are shuttered tight. The fireplaces burn low. Outside, the River Thames slides past, dark and swollen with winter. Courtiers whisper in corners. Waiting, the great bells of London remain silent, not yet allowed to ring, because for 3 days, the king's death is kept secret, not out of respect, but out of fear. Fear of what comes next. Fear of what always follows when a giant falls. The boy is 9 years old. His name is Edward. He is Henry's only legitimate son. Born to Jane Seymour after all the fire and blood, he is clever, pâle, quiet, raised in a cocoon of Tudors and Latin grammar, drilled in scripture and duty. Now, suddenly, he is King of England, Edward VI. But the crown, though small, does not fit easily on a child's head. It weighs more than gold. It carries the weight of a kingdom, torn in half by religion, the ghosts of 5 murdered wives, and the unquiet breath of a father who believed God himself had carved the throne beneath him. Edward does not rule. Not really. He is watched, guided, managed. Power passes to his uncle Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, who styles himself Lord Protector. He is ambitious, bold, convinced that the future of England lies in Protestantism, in simplification, in cutting away the old beliefs like dead branches from a living tree. Under his direction, the Reformation moves forward with a new, sharper edge. Latin is cast out. The Mass is rewritten. Priests are allowed to marry. Icons are removed. Altars torn down. Books burned and books printed. All in the same breath. The boy watches. He does not complain. He does not rebel. He writes in his diary. He reads his Bible. He signs his name when told. He nods when men kneel before him. But he is still a child. A king only in name. Behind the walls of Hampton Court and Windsor, his body grows, but not fast enough. His shoulders are narrow. His face too thin. The doctors whisper. His breath comes sharp and shallow on cold days. He is the center of power. And yet the most fragile thing in the room, outside. The country shudders beneath the weight of rapid change. In the north and west, where the old Catholic ways still linger like incense, people grow restless. In the summer of 1549, Devon and Cornwall erupt in rebellion. Thousands march, demanding a return to the Latin Mass, to familiar prayers, to the old world that Henry shattered. And Edward's ministers are now burning down entirely. The rebellion is crushed, brutally. Blood runs in ditches. The message is clear. This is the new England. And those who do not accept it will be buried in it. And still, the boy writes in his diary. He writes about sermons, ablutions, about the weather. He does not write about the blood. He does not write about the fear. He does not write about how often he coughs at night. But the truth is beginning to show. By the year 1552, Edward is fading. He is now 15. He should be strong, should be preparing to take the reins of power, to lead armies, to choose a bride. But he is pale, coughing, his skin waxy and stretched. The physicians cannot cure him. His tutors grow anxious. The court begins to shift again, like the sea preparing for another storm. And then, in the spring of 1553, the boy king begins to die. The disease, likely tuberculosis, devours him from within. His strength melts. His voice weakens. The court surrounds him, pretending stillness. But the factions sharpen their knives beneath their smiles. Because once again, there is no clear line. Mary, his half-sister, a Catholic, stands next. Then Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, quiet, intelligent, unreadable. But Edward, who had been raised in the fire of Protestantism. I cannot bear the thought of a Catholic queen undoing all that had been built on his watch. However brief that watch may be, he drafts a new succession. Lady Jane Grey, his cousin, a gentle girl of 16, devout and educated, is named heir. She is married to the son of the powerful Duke of Northumberland, who now controls the court. It is a desperate move, a fragile thread pulled tight across a crumbling cliff. On the 6th of July, Edward dies. He is only 15. The crown, still too heavy, slips from his lifeless hand. And once again, the bells of England toll not in celebration, but in fear, because Mary is coming, and the fire that Henry sparked, that Edward tried to fan into flame, is about to be met with a storm of a different kind. But for now, let us stay in this quiet moment. Let us stay with the boy whose breath has stilled, whose diary lies closed, whose father's expectations were far too large for his small shoulders. Let us stay in the candlelit hush of the chapel, where his body lies beneath a cloth of gold, surrounded by priests who whisper prayers in a language he had forbidden. Let us stay, if only for a moment, in the fading warmth of a crown that never truly fit. Sleep now. Mary is already riding toward London, and the world is about to burn again. It is the summer of the year 1553, and London waits with its breath held and its mouth half open. The boy king is dead. The court, scrambling to protect the new Protestant order, has placed a crown on the head of a pale girl named Jane. Lady Jane Grey, 16 years old, trembling in velvet, has never asked to be queen. She bows when told, signs when told, stands when told, and watches as the world collapses beneath her feet in exactly 9 days. Because Mary is coming. Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Mary, who was once declared illegitimate. Mary, who was stripped of her title, forced to serve in her infant half-sister Elizabeth's household, and forbidden to speak her mother's name aloud. Mary, who spent her youth half praying and half plotting, moving through a court that had banished her, waiting like a flame smothered beneath damp wood. Now the flame has found air. She gathers support with astonishing speed. The people remember Catherine. They remember the old ways. The Latin Mass, the saints in their niches, the incense curling through stone naves. They remember the woman who had knelt with folded hands while the king's heart wandered to younger beds. Mary rides to London with banners flying, greeted by roaring crowds. church bells, and open arms. The Privy Council, those same men who had crowned Jane, abandon their girl and bend the knee. Mary enters the Tower, not as a prisoner, but as a queen, and the fire begins. Lady Jane Grey, soft-spoken, learned, tragically devout, is imprisoned. She pleads only for her husband's life. He, too, is locked away. Mary does not want to kill her cousin. Not at first. She allows her to live, but Jane becomes a symbol, and symbols, in times like these, are dangerous. When Protestants rise in rebellion, trying to prevent Mary's marriage to the Spanish Catholic Prince Philip, Jane is no longer a girl. She is a banner, and banners are torn down. On the 12th of February, in the year 1554, Jane is taken to Tower Green. She walks quietly. A blindfold is tied. She stretches out her hands, searching for the block, whispering, "What shall I do? Where is it?" A trembling hand guides her, and the axe falls. Mary weeps, but she does not stop. The Queen, now fully enthroned, begins her true work, the restoration of the Catholic Church. The Pope's authority is welcomed back. The English bishops who resisted are removed, and those who preached the new Protestant gospel, those who had once flourished under Edward, are warned. Many flee. Some stay. Some resist. And then come the burnings. At first, they are occasional. A handful of executions in the early months. But soon the rhythm of fire becomes regular. Methodical. Deliberate. Heresy is punished, not in shadow but in public. Stakes are erected in marketplaces. Crowds gather. Wood is stacked high. The condemned are tied. Prayers are offered. Flames are lit. 300 men and women burn. Among them, Thomas Cranmer, the very man who had crowned her father, head of the Church of England, who had signed the annulment of her mother's marriage, who had guided Edward's Protestant reforms. His death is slow. Spectators weep. Children are led away. The Queen watches from a distance, her face unreadable, and the people begin to murmur. At first, they had cheered her. Now, they whisper, not because they have turned Protestant, and most still know the Latin prayers in their bones, but because fire, when used too often, stops purifying and starts terrifying. The smell of burning flesh clings to London's air. The ashes settle on the cobblestones, and a new name begins to take hold, one she will never live to hear. Bloody Mary. She marries Philip of Spain. It is a political alliance, but she is in love with him. Desperately, painfully. He, cold and distant, visits rarely. She believes herself pregnant. Twice, once in the year 1554, once in 1557. Her belly swells. Her ladies prepare a nursery. She writes letters, signs decree, names godparents. But there is no child. The second time, the swelling does not go away. Her hair begins to fall. She cannot eat. She cannot sleep. And somewhere deep within her body, something is growing, not life, but death. The physicians cannot help her, and Philip is gone. In November of the year 1558, Mary dies. She is 42 years old. She dies without an heir, without love, without the Catholic England she had tried to resurrect in flames. The Pope sends no tribute. Her husband sends no messenger. Her body is buried beneath the stones of Westminster Abbey, beside the sister she once distrusted, once punished, once banished, Elizabeth. But that is a story waiting just beyond the edge of night. Let us stay. For now, in the hush after the fire, let us sit beside Mary's broken body and remember the girl who once clung to her mother's skirts as her father married other women, who watched her status fall like a dropped coin in the dirt, who was told, again and again, that she was not queen, not daughter, not legitimate. Let us remember that she rose, that she ruled, that she tried to bring back what she had lost, and that in doing so, she became the very thing she had once feared. The air grows still. The ash has settled. But the fire, oh, the fire still glows in memory. Sleep now. The daughter of Anne Boleyn is about to rise. The year is 1558. The bells of London toll once more. But not in mourning, not only. Mary is dead. The great bonfires of her faith have gone out. The stakes are removed. The smoke has thinned. And in the silence that follows, the city turns toward a new queen. A younger queen, a woman wrapped not in crimson velvet, but in shadow, a child once called illegitimate, whose very birth was considered a sin, whose mother's blood stained the Tower grounds, where now she must reign. Her name is Elizabeth. She is 25 years old. When she enters the capital, she wears white. Her red hair catches the winter sunlight like fire woven into silk. The people cheer not because they know her, not because they trust her, but because she is not her sister. She is not Mary, not the woman who lit the fires, not the queen who brought foreign armies. Elizabeth smiles, lifts her hand, and bows just enough to make the crowds believe she is theirs. But beneath the lace collar and the measured grace is a mind sharper than any dagger hidden at court. She has been watching for years. She watched her mother die, not with her own eyes, but through the whispers. She grew up with the sound of the axe, always nearby. She learned how not to speak, how not to flinch, how not to trust too easily. And now, crowned with a golden circlet that once graced the heads of queens who bled for this throne, Elizabeth begins her reign with a lesson written into her bones. Power must be worn like armor, never like perfume. The court changes quickly. The Latin Mass is gone again. English prayers return. But unlike her brother, unlike her sister, Elizabeth does not demand uniform belief. Not at first. She walks a narrow bridge. I have no desire to make windows into men's souls, she says. She does not burn. She does not banish. Not yet. The Protestants return from exile. The Catholics remain, quiet and cautious. The churches are whitewashed once more. The Pope excommunicates her. She smiles and builds a navy, for she understands deeply that the throne is not stable. That marriage could destroy her. That foreign alliances are traps in gold lace. Suitors line up from across Europe. Kings and dukes send portraits and promises. Elizabeth listens, flirts, smiles. But she marries no one. I am already bound to a husband, she says. The Kingdom of England. And the people believe her. She becomes more than queen. She becomes myth. Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the woman who would rather rule alone than die in childbirth like her mother, or be discarded like Catherine of Aragon, or be silenced like Catherine Howard. She turns her body into a symbol, untouched, unconquered, immortal. She is both mother and bride, to a kingdom, still recovering from years of blood and fire. And England battered, poor, confused begins to bloom. It is not easy. There are plots. Always. The Catholic North rebels. Spain threatens. Scotland watches, but Elizabeth endures. She survives the treacheries. She weaves words like spells. Her court becomes a theater. Her speeches daggers wrapped in velvet. She raises men like William Cecil and Francis Walsingham loyal. Ruthless. Brilliant. She surrounds herself with poets and spies. She rules not with armies but with image. Portraits show her ageless. Radiant. Beyond touch. The truth that she ages. Aches. Loses is kept hidden behind pearls and powder. And in the year 1588, the storm comes. Spain, enraged by her refusal to bend, sends an armada, great ships, black with cannon. Sails like thunderclouds. Philip II, the same prince who once sat beside Queen Mary, now seeks to destroy Elizabeth, to return England to Rome. The wind, the tides, and the English Navy answer first. Sir Francis Drake lights fire ships in the night. The armada breaks. England survives. And in that moment, standing in armor before her troops at Tilbury, declaring she has the heart and stomach of a king, Elizabeth becomes more than monarch. She becomes destiny. But still, she is alone. In the dark hours, in the candlelit silence of Whitehall, when the tapestries stir only from the breath of the fire, she is a woman who has buried every rival, outlived every suitor, and held every secret too long. Her hair thins, her teeth ache, her hands tremble when not watched, but she never lets them see it. She paints her face whiter. She darkens hair brows. She tightens the laces of her gowns until she can hardly breathe. Her courtiers bow lower. Her poets write longer odes. And the country, for all its tension, grows stronger. Trade expands. The English tongue stretches its muscles. William Shakespeare writes his histories, his tragedies, his comedies in words. The Queen herself speaks fluently. London swells. Merchants grow rich. The gentry build new estates on land, once held by monks. The memory of Mary's flames recedes. The Elizabethan age has begun. And yet, behind it all, the shadows remain. The memory of her mother Anne Boleyn, who died to give her life. The ghost of her father Henry, whose will made her a queen. The weight of a crown built on corpses and sermons and fire. She carries it all. In silence, with steel in her spine. She never names an heir. She never speaks of the end. But the court begins to watch more closely. Her steps slow. Her appetite fathers. Her laughter, once sharp and sudden, grows rare. She withdraws. She stands for hours. Unmoving, she refuses her bed. She will not be seen lying down. Not even in sleep. As if to do so would be to admit that time wins. And in the year 1603, she dies. Alone. Silent. Crowned. Until her last breath. Her body is wrapped in cloth of gold. Carried by barge down the River Thames. The people line the banks. The bells toll. Not for fear. Not for anger. Not even for mourning, but for the end of something radiant and hard and impossible. And England weeps. Not because it was perfect, but because it is over. Now the fire has burned down. The great voices have gone quiet. Henry, Catherine, Anne, Jane, Anna again, Catherine, and Catherine again. All are dust beneath stone. Edward, the boy who coughed into his crown, is gone. Mary, who burned for a faith she could not save, is gone. Elizabeth, who stood alone at the height of an empire, who turned her face into legend. She too has fallen asleep. The Tudor line is finished, and yet, the echo of their footsteps still lingers in the stones of every chapel, every courthouse, every village green. Let us leave the court now. Let us walk away from the thrones and the tapestries and the glittering masks. Let us step into the villages, into the parishes, into the homes of the people who never had crowns to carry, only children to feed, prayers to whisper, and harvests to survive. Because for all the wars and weddings, for all the burning and crowning and breaking of churches, most people in Tudor England lived in rooms that smelled of smoke and straw, rooms with low ceilings and uneven floors, rooms where bread was precious and light came only from fire. They heard the news slowly, passed from mouth to mouth, shaped by rumor more than truth. A new queen, a dead king, another law, about which words to say at church. They listened. They adapted. They knelt when told. They prayed when afraid. And always, they went back to the fields, to the markets, to the wells, to the firesides where children slept, curled beside dogs, and dreams drifted like wood smoke up into the dark. They watched their churches change, once filled with color saints in every window, candles burning at every hour, now plain, whitewashed walls, quiet pulpits, English words instead of Latin ones. Some wept for the old ways. Some welcomed the new. Most simply learned not to speak too loudly about what they believed. They felt the monasteries disappear. The alms that once fed the poor, gone. The monks who once nursed the sick, scattered. The ancient rhythms, saints' days, processions, fasting were broken, rebuilt, broken again. One generation baptized in Latin, the next in English, then Latin again, then English once more. Some priests married, some were arrested, some vanished altogether. It was not peace. Not really, but it was what passed for it. And through it all, the seasons turned. Spring brought lambing, summer brought harvest, autumn brought meat curing, cider pressing, smoke coiling from chimneys as the nights grew longer. Winter brought hunger and candles and hope. A Tudor woman, her name forgotten, boiled barley in a pot, while her youngest clung to her skirts. Her husband spoke little. His back ached. His hands were calloused. Their lives were short, often brutal, often beautiful in small ways. The first strawberries in June, the rhythm of a lullaby, the comfort of knowing which way the wind would turn. They lived beneath the shadow of Henry, of Mary, and of Elizabeth, but they also lived beyond it. They were not the names etched in books, but the breath between chapters. And when Elizabeth died, when the Tudor line ended, and James of Scotland rode south to become king of this New England, the people watched, waited, breathed, prayed, and began again. The kingdom Henry left behind was different from the one he inherited. It was stronger. It was crueler. It was louder. It was lonelier. The church was no longer universal. The monarch no longer merely mortal. Parliament had been pulled closer to the crown and would one day break it. The people no longer feared the Pope. They feared silence. Instead, the silence that came after law, after fire, after kings fell. And yet through all of it they endured, because history is not only made by kings and queens, it is made in the bread that rose on a warm windowsill, in the hands that mended fishing nets, in the calloused fingers that signed their names on a marriage line, in the soft hum of lullabies sung in barns, in alleys, in back rooms. That is where England truly lived. That is where it always has. And now, as the candle burns lower and the world outside your window grows still. You can let them rest. Let Henry sleep. Let Mary sleep. Let Elizabeth sleep. Let the courtiers who lied, the queens who waited, the children who were crowned too soon, let them all sleep. The fire is low now. The bells no longer toll. The story is finished not with a sword, not with a kiss, but with the hush that follows when the final curtain falls. So close your eyes, let your breath slow, and drift back, one last time, through a world of velvet and smoke, of firelight and iron, and of voices long gone, but never quite silent. You have walked through the reign of a monster. You have stood beside a girl who died for love. You have watched a queen rise from the ashes of her mother's name. And now, it is your time to rest. Good night. Dear listener, the Tudors will wait. They always do.